barely 24 hours ago, Kenya's courts declined to lift orders freezing the implementation of the 2023 Finance Act. Now, without that law in place, the Kenyan government cannot impose a mix of higher taxes and new ones as part of its broader plan to raise 2.7 trillion shillings. It's about $19.1 billion in taxes. That order effectively stops the imposition of a range of adjusted taxes, including 2 new tax bands on personal income at 32.5% and at 35%, as well as a housing tax, which will see 1.5% of employee salaries be deducted with matching deductions from their employers. This law also looks to double value-added tax rates on petrol, diesel and kerosene to 16%, among others. Now, Kenya's Chief Justice has been asked by the High Court to form a 3-judge bench to hear the case in full. So assuming any of the 6 legal challenges to this case fail, the one we're talking about is just one of 6, remember, what impact would it actually have on businesses and households? That's why I started my conversation with Nikhil Hira. He's a partner at the business advisory firm Kody Africa.
If you look at it, we've got the personal tax bands have increased. You've got the 2 new 32.5% and 35% for the higher income earners. You've got the housing levy, which was first to be a fund and is now just going into government coffers for affordable housing. So it's not entirely
ring-fenced at all.
It doesn't appear to be.
General coffers.
It doesn't appear to be to me. When I look at the Finance Act, it's coming in through the Employment Act. It simply says employee will pay 1.5, employer will pay 1.5, no cap, and it'll go into the Treasury. Now, what the Treasury does with it, we don't know. It's got to be ring-fenced if it is actually for a specific purpose, but there's no saying how that will happen or not happen. Then we're seeing a series of increases in turnover tax, 1% to 3%, which is a bit strange given that that's really the hustlers that are going to suffer with that, whatever the hustlers really means.
But small, medium-sized enterprises.
Yeah, so those with turnover under 15 million and above 1 million will now, instead of paying 1% of turnover, will pay 3% of turnover. That's quite significant for people who are probably not earning significant amount of net profit, as it were. You've got increases that happened in NSSF earlier this year. So already everyone's net disposable income is going down even further. You've got proposals on NHIF going to a flat rate of 2.75%.
That's essentially our contributions to the National Pension Fund and the National Hospital Insurance Fund.
Absolutely. Right. So pension and insurance, again, it's going in and it's coming out of my net income. So my disposable income is just dropping. And then we come to the indirect taxes. VAT on fuel, 8%. So they've actually doubled the VAT from 8 to 16. So that's an additional 8%. Which incidentally, surprisingly, is already in place.
Even though the Act has been suspended.
Even though the Act has been suspended. And I'm not sure on what basis that is. I'm also not sure what happens if the court, now going to this 3-bench sitting, if they say that this is unconstitutional and you shouldn't raise it, there doesn't seem to be any reason for that, but you shouldn't have raised it, how do I get my 8% back? Because I'm the one who bore it.
And that's essentially my next question to you, and I know we've discussed this several times over the years. There's always been this persistent problem with refunds, even just on VAT, which is, it's due back to you as an individual, as an enterprise. And here, given the sort of legal squabbles, right, that essentially are boiling around this act, it just looks like, the consumers will be facing a nightmare trying to claw back whatever money they've already paid out in this tax if they do go and claim it. And even if they do, who do they claim it from? The oil marketing companies, or do they go straight to KRA, or do they go straight to Treasury?
We had this discussion about 6 years ago about excise duty on beer, if I remember right. There is actually no mechanism for me as an individual to go and get this back. How am I going to get it back? Where do I go to, as you said, do I go to KRA? They're not refunding business, let alone refunding me my 8% on the fuel, which is obviously not a significant number in the larger scheme of things. The oil marketing companies are going to say, well, we had to charge it. It's not for us to refund. It's for the government to refund or KRA to refund.
But is that really the case, though? Because I guess the counter argument someone could make is, yeah, but all EPRA does is set a cap on prices. It says you can't charge beyond X. But by definition, that doesn't mean you have to charge at the maximum. You could potentially price your fuel below that.
Well, yes, and we've seen instances of that. I mean, there have been times when one is charging 100, the other is charging 98. We have seen that, and that's part of a competitive market in a sense. There is nothing to stop anyone from charging less. You're right, the cap, they can't go above the cap. But my point, though, more is that the EPRA increases 14th of every month. This increase was done on the 30th of June, effective 1st July. It was on the basis that the Finance Act included a provision to say that where we were charging 8% VAT on fuel product, it's now 16%. But prior to that, the courts ruled this is suspended. So really, should they be charging that? Should we not be going back to where we were 180 something pre-30th of June? And on the 14th of July, you do your normal adjustment. But until such time as the court says this act is now in force with that provision in it, then I'm a bit confused as to why we're being charged that additional 8%.